All right, Ryan, why don't you tell us what's on your radar?
So 1 million people in Louisiana are without power, and authorities there are urging people who evacuated not to return. Colorado is cutting off water to California. Residents of Lake Tahoe are fleeing forest fires. As if he was looking to act out the world's most obvious metaphor, one man played his violin amid the retreat. This follows multiple Northwest heat domes, biblical flooding in Tennessee, droughts and heat waves that have destroyed crops, and that's just here in the United States. Our climate future is here, happening now. And meanwhile, the fossil fuel industry wants to continue building more and more infrastructure to extract ever more oil, even as it's plain to see we need to be moving in the opposite direction. The flashpoint for years was the Keystone XL pipeline that was supposed to bring Canadian tar sands across our northern border, destined for export abroad. The new flashpoint is in northeast Minnesota, where the company Enbridge is building its so-called Line 3. More Perfect Union and the Minnesota Reformer have been reporting heavily on protests against the project, and the Reformer unearthed collusion between police and the oil company, the same thing that happened at Standing Rock.
An indigenous-led movement is trying to stop construction of a pipeline in Minnesota called Line 3. Line 3 would bring 1 million barrels of tar sands per day through pristine wetland and indigenous lands. The company building it, Enbridge, is responsible for the biggest inland oil spill in U.S. history. Activists want the Biden administration to cancel the project, but they're facing daily intimidation from police officers receiving money from Enbridge.
The sheriffs of all of these counties are being incentivized by being paid in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's only going to go up by Enbridge, by the corporation, through the Public Safety Escrow Trust.
An escrow trust account is basically a fund held by a third party made to facilitate payments between two other parties. In this case, Enbridge set up an escrow trust to reimburse the costs of local Minnesota law enforcement related to the construction of their pipeline. The way it works is that local law enforcement can request reimbursement from the escrow agent, in this case, a former deputy chief of a local police department. According to documents obtained by the Minnesota Reformer, local police have received more than $500,000 from Enbridge so far.
Before even getting to the climate implications, there are plenty of reasons to object to this project on fairly standard grounds. It cuts through more than 100 waterways and through wetlands important not just environmentally, but to the production of wild rice collected by the local indigenous population.
In the coming months, Canadian company Enbridge Energy plans to drill and trench water crossings under and through pristine lakes, streams, and wetlands in the upper Mississippi River watershed. They will bore directly under the Mississippi itself in 2 separate locations.
I'm not a scientist, but digging up wetlands to lay down an oil pipeline and then sending that pipeline under the Mississippi River in 2 locations sounds like it comes with a bit of risk. In fact, it puts the entire watershed at risk.
If you trench through a wetland many, many times, it's going to impact the whole wetland. No cumulative assessment was done by the state or Enbridge to say how close are we to a threshold where we're going to see problems with the Mississippi.
Many of the politicians who have long rejected the very idea of climate change are finally now acknowledging that it's real. But their solution is to mitigate and adapt, not to try to slow or reverse it. Well, guess what? Not only does the Line 3 pipeline exacerbate climate change, it actively undermines our ability to deal with that warming as it comes.
Wetlands are going to be even more important with a warming climate, changing climate, because again, they store water. They release water through a drought type period. We're going to need that really badly.
So here's a crazy idea. Let's not destroy that. So, Alyssa, what do you think it would take for Democrats, for advocates who are working on climate change to persuade the right, to persuade Republicans that it really is time to stop building new fossil fuel infrastructure?
Well, it's a great topic, Ryan, really important. And I'm involved with the American Conservation Coalition, which is a conservative organization focused on protecting the environment and educating voters about the issues with climate change and trying to tackle it. I do take a very skeptical position of this. Are our leaders globally actually serious about combating it, or is it more, I know there are certain ones who are the activists around it, AOC, the Green New Deal, but I see, even a President Biden, he appoints a climate czar who then jets around on private jets, and President Biden lifts sanctions on Nord Stream 2 in Russia. That's impacting the climate as much as a domestic pipeline is. And so I don't say that to punt the question, because I do think my own party absolutely has an obligation to get serious about climate change. And I've noticed that younger conservatives are much more engaged on the issue because I think they've lived with it and been educated on it in a way that maybe the previous generation hasn't. But I worry about more of the global perspective of we're kind of tinkering around the edges of a crisis and nobody's saying, like, how do we as a global community actually deal with this? And again, the Chinese are the worst offenders on the planet. They were a part of Paris, but they didn't actually do anything. So, I mean, it's one of the most existential threats we face, and I kind of feel like there's no good faith actors on the issue.
Yeah, I just wonder if we're kind of moving, when we want to reduce our carbon footprint, but I just wonder if we're just kind of moving it around the globe rather than actually doing something about it. I mean, until we as a nation and really globally reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, we're not, I mean, we need them. And so if we need them and we can't get them here, or if we can't get them from our neighbor in Canada or wherever, then we have to go get them from the Middle East. We have to, so I just wonder if we're kind of shifting the carbon footprint away so we can feel good and say, oh, look, we've reduced it. But in reality, the global footprint is still the same. And so I think we have to work very hard to, obviously this pipeline has a lot of issues it goes through. I know wild rice is at risk with this. This will create more, I think they said that it was going to be worse for the climate than just the entire Minnesota economy combined. So, there's a lot of issues with this particular pipeline, but my kind of overall feeling is, what are we going to do to get everybody to reduce carbon footprint so that we can reduce our reliance and the necessity of these types of projects?
And I do think that it was fair to ask that question over the past decade or a couple decades. Was the United States in its deindustrialization just kind of then pushing its pollution off into China and then blaming China for the pollution that it was creating to produce products that it was then selling back to the United States? I think that's a totally fair criticism. But right now we're staring at a $3.5 trillion reconciliation package that is before the United States House, the United States Senate, that if its climate elements are actually implemented according to the research that's done on it, would actually enable the United States to reach its Paris commitments, and not by pushing its emissions offshore, but by actually reducing and eliminating emissions right here and replacing them with clean energies. And if the United States actually does that, then that could be a galvanizing factor around the world. China, which has global diplomatic ambitions, would not want to be seen as trailing the United States, which has been mocked on this issue for a very long time. So if the U.S. passes this piece of legislation, if it makes those investments, it could be an actual global leader. Or it can, reject that and go ahead and just keep building pipelines and then complain that, half of Louisiana is out of power and molding throughout August.
I think it's a fair point to say, we could lead on this and maybe China would follow. My fear is that this reconciliation bill more or less eliminates entire industries over a period of time, would result in massive unemployment for people who are not trained to work in some of these next generation, next technology sectors. All the while other bad actors on the global stage are going to continue to do exactly what they're doing and to, produce carbon at an extremely high rate. So there's got to be something that an international body can do to actually push this issue. I'm just not seeing it happen, whether it's the UN or WHO or anywhere else.
All right, well, let's try this reconciliation bill and see how that goes. And then if that doesn't work, we can try something else. So, Kim, I'm looking forward to seeing what's on your radar next.